Livecast, livecast.
Welcome to the livecast. Welcome to the show. Setting up your
Says
meeting.
we're live. Says we're live here at my end.
We're live.
Livecast.
Welcome to the livecast.
Oh yeah, I can hear your sound coming through.
There it is. Hello, everybody. My name's Glenn Scrivener.
My name's Paul Feasy.
And together we're Scrivzeezy, and we are. I am self-isolating. Paul is just a dosser. Staying at home and working from home as ever. This is your thing now, isn't it? Working from home.
Yeah.
How long have you worked from home for?
Well, for at least 2.5 years, really.
Okay.
Yeah, at least partially.
Lots of people online are now wanting to know how, if they've never worked from home before, what are the challenges? What are your top tips and techniques as we're all going into lockdown, as we're all self-isolating? I'm self-isolating because I have a little cough, which is, I think would be fine, except that if I'm in a pulpit and I'm speaking in front of lots of people and I go, people are no longer listening to the message.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing is you do generally need to try and do some work. I mean, that's always an issue.
Okay. You heard it here first, people. Can do a bit of work.
Like you just need to, I find it quite helpful making lists of stuff that I actually need to do. And I'll say I'll have this done by 11 a.m. or whatever, or 12 or something.
Yes.
Because then you actually get through stuff, and the other, I suppose, so you have to do some work. But then the other thing is you have to stop working.
Okay.
So
start working.
And start working, but stop working as well. This is all, and this is all for free, people.
Imagine
you don't need to pay for this advice, okay? It's like a free clinic online.
You get what you pay for, people. You get what you pay for.
Yeah, no, because I think the temptation is when you get to lunchtime, you just work through lunch and things, and then you don't really stop. Also, it's helpful to go outside. That's quite useful, but not now. Don't go outside at the moment. You'll die. It's terrible. Don't do it.
There's always that, but yes, we've asked people for their various questions this week in particular about coronavirus. Don't ask us about auto maintenance. That is not our area. But we are obviously epidemiologists and virologists of some standing in the scientific community.
Very much so.
Very much so.
Highly respected in our field.
We're not any of those things, by the way.
No, not
but
at all.
we have been asked questions about how Christians and church leaders should respond to the coronavirus. And one person asked a very good question. AJB on Twitter asked, would Christians from history that we cited last week, would they have responded differently in the light of modern germ theory? So for those who didn't tune in last week we did a little bit of a history, 7 times in history when the church had to deal with plagues, pestilence, pandemics, those sorts of things. And we spoke in glowing terms of Christian responses, perhaps in Carthage in 251 or in Corinth in the 2nd century. And for instance, Dionysius, the Bishop of Corinth in the 2nd century, he spoke of the way in which Christians handled the plague of their day. He said, most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ. And with them, they departed this life serenely happy, for they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pains. Many, in nursing and curing others, transferred their death to themselves and died in their stead. A beautiful Christ-like, picture of what it is to you take on death so that you can give others life. But AJB has asked a very good question. What about these days? Or with all that we know about germ theory, with all that we know about how you can be asymptomatic and still carry the disease, what do we think then about moving towards the vulnerable? And at that stage, love might require something different. Probably you don't just rush towards the vulnerable, towards the elderly, those with underlying health conditions, heedless, because you might well be a carrier. rather
Yeah.
than just carer. So
Yeah, you've got to exercise wisdom, haven't you, I suppose, in this.
Yeah. But I think it's wisdom that is shaping love. Love should still be the goal, and should still be the foundation of how you are moving towards people. And self-sacrifice has got to be at the heart of what love is. So don't self-isolate simply out of fear or simply out of apathy. That is not motivated by love. If it's motivated by love, then that's a different thing. And there might well be lots of ways in which Christians will be called on in the next few weeks and months to sacrifice themselves, perhaps especially in healthcare professions. Perhaps as we seek to serve the elderly, perhaps they will be self-isolating very much, and maybe there are costly ways that we can reach out there. But yeah, we don't simply take what the Christians did in Carthage and bring it into today, because they didn't have professionalized healthcare and they didn't have germ theory. But still, love should be the motivation, I think.
Yeah.
So, but I do think there's a danger as social distancing becomes the watchword. I think there's a great danger that actually emotional distancing becomes our default setting.
Right.
It's already, that's already a big feature of modern society, emotional distancing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do wonder whether being given the green light about these kinds of things, it might exacerbate the selfishness that is natural to us all. Is one thought.
Yeah. And I guess we've started to see some of that come out in the behavior of people already, haven't we?
Yes. In what way? In what way?
Well, I think we've seen it, haven't we, in the stockpiling of things and the supermarkets. People fighting over loo rolls and stuff like that, and stockpiling bits and bobs. People seem to be saying they're going to the shops and there's nothing, there's not much left on the shelves in terms of some of the longer lasting products that people might be buying. So when push comes to shove and it's really you or me, it ain't going to be you, is it? It's going to be me. So I'm going to isolate myself away from you, and I don't really care what happens to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Henna's on Twitter has asked, what drives the panic buying phenomenon? What is it?
Well, I think it's probably fear.
Yeah.
And selfishness. I think it's one of those interesting moments, isn't it, where most of the time here in the UK at least, and probably in the West, we feel like we're in control of stuff. And this is a moment where you realize, it doesn't matter whether you're filthy rich or, quite poor, you're not really in control. You know, Tom Hanks has got it,
Right.
Tom Hanks has got it. Anyone could get it. So, I think people are just looking out for themselves, basically. That's what it is. It's no one else is going to help me.
Yeah.
And as you see the people, you read the comments on Facebook, people saying, I've just been to Morrison's and it's carnage and there's none of this and there's none of that. You look at it and you go, that's crazy that people are doing this. But also I'm sure there's a bit of us all going, maybe I should have bought some more beans or something,
Totally.
Will they all be gone by the time I get there?
It would be interesting to notice. Like, I think it's very natural to think, it's probably just a couple of really appalling hoarders who've gone out. And we've spotted them. There's some mobile phone footage somewhere out there of the 3 or 4 hoarders who've taken all the toilet roll. And we point the finger at them. It's just that all of us have just bought 5% more. Like, pretty much. That's like,
sure.
As we seek to point the finger at all the hoarders, there's 3 fingers pointing straight back. That's the funny thing. All these terrible hoarders out there.
Yeah. No, it's true. I'm sure it's true.
Yeah. I think it goes to show like these times of pandemic, they're just an intensification of the normal course of life, actually. And it's not a case of, David Brooks wrote a terrific article in the New York Times over the weekend, and he said, we may not like who we become in the next few weeks.
Mm.
That was the strapline of his article. You may not like who you become in the next few weeks, but of course, you didn't become that selfish person.
No,
Overnight.
it's just it's just allowed to come out,
Right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, like I was, as I mentioned I would earlier to you that I was preaching on Genesis 9 yesterday, and kind of picking up on the end of Genesis 8 as well, and particularly the stuff that crops up there, that every inclination of man's heart is only evil from childhood. And you're like, well, this is, in terms of illustrating that, I was like, well, just look at what's going on, like in our supermarkets.
Right.
That is human nature right there, and it's just unveiled for all to see. And I said, what's the reason? I said, what's the reason that you and I sitting there in church? I said, what's the reason that we're not out there taking all the loo roll and fighting over it in the aisles? I said, the reason we're not doing that is because we've got plenty of loo roll. I said, don't kid yourself. The reality is, when it gets down to it and you suddenly realize it's you or me, well, that's when you realize, well, it's going to be me, and I'm going to come and I'm going to take your loo roll, basically. So I threatened the whole congregation. I said, basically, watch out, I'm coming for you. Don't be fooled by my slight frame. I do kickboxing. I said, I will kick you. I will take your loo roll. All right.
And this is you urging them to be more Christ-like.
Okay. Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
I get it.
I just said it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much for that thin veneer of respectability and goodness to suddenly the cracks appear. And it's at times like this. It's like you say. It's not like people were turned into these monsters. It was always just there, but it was allowed to come out.
Right. So. Yeah. And Ian McCarthy on Top Chat has asked, has anyone been elbow bumped in the throat in the battle for bog roll yet? I love the word yet in that question. It's coming.
Everyone at church yesterday was kind of jokingly doing the old, let's do elbows, like just touch elbows instead of shaking hands. And I said that I feel like I'm preparing for when I get to Morrison's, just to barge some old ladies out the way, like quick elbow to the throat.
Man, we do not
condone these things.
But yes, it's an intensification. Plagues, pandemics are an intensification of what is the normal course of life. So there might be a death rate of 1% in terms of catching coronavirus. There might be a death rate of as much as 6%. It seems like in Italy right now, it's about 6% of those who've been diagnosed with the virus. But still, 100% of people will die. And we never, we never contemplate that. I mean, death has never been as little a part of our public consciousness as it is right now. In the modern 21st century West, we never see death. I've said before on this show, I in training to be an Anglican minister, I remember the person who was teaching us about funerals just asked us, how many people have seen dead bodies? And it was like me and one other person in a class full of almost 100. And it was like, which is bizarre. In other ages, of course, your siblings would have died in childbirth. You wouldn't have been able to get out of childhood without seeing many, many dead bodies. And these days,
even in cultures today, like, people die and the bodies are very much on display. Grandma's on the table in the living room or whatever, and for a few days, and everyone comes round. So death is very visible, whereas we don't really have that. If someone dies, often in hospital, or they're taken off to the morgue or something, and they're hidden away, and then you put them in a box and you don't look in the box. We very rarely have open things. So death is very hidden, isn't it?
And even like as they report on Italy, I was looking for some videos about, ICU doctors and, how horrible it is. But most of the videos I could find were of the solidarity of the Italian people, and they were all in their apartment blocks, singing the national anthem and the triumph of the human spirit.
That's what I've been doing. I've been leaning out the bathroom window singing God Save the Queen.
You got to do something. You got to do. So, but love your neighbor might suggest, Paul, that you refrain from doing that.
Yeah, they've asked me to isolate more.
Right. Self-mute as well. But yeah, like we want the triumph of the human spirit to be kind of more the news story than 1,000 people dying in Italy, which is what is the case, and people die out of sight, out of mind. And to be honest, with the elderly and the prospect in the UK of the elderly self-isolating for 4 months, I mean, that's what's being talked about at the moment.
Yeah,
they're saying we're not pulling the trigger on this yet, but it is a possibility. Perhaps at some point in the next few weeks, we will say all the elderly must self-isolate. And you just think, actually, we have isolated the elderly already before even doing this. The sense of loneliness among the aged in our society is immense, and we're just going to isolate them even further through this, because we just put the issue of our frailty and our aging and our mortality, we just put that off and put that off and put that off, and I guess a plague is a sense of intensifying what's already there. So one of the things that plagues intensify is our fears of mortality. Another thing is our fears of disease. Another is our fears of running out. Many people have huge fears of running out of, and it could be different things for different people. But just that idea of scarcity, that idea of finitude, that we are not infinite beings.
Yeah, I mean, we've never really had to deal with the concept of not having potentially a lot of stuff being there available for us. Like you think in generations past, you work to get your food, and you hope the harvest comes.
Yes.
And you're very reliant on whether that goes well or not. Whereas we don't really have any of that system at all. We just kind of think, well, I just pop down the shops. Yeah. And there'll always be food in the shops.
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens. So.
Yeah. And then we keep seeing these, photographs of empty shelves, and that's just hasn't, that's like communist era Russia, isn't like when's the last time that people had to deal with empty shelves? And Amanda Kaminsky on Top Chat, she says people should stop sharing photos of empty shelves. It's creating more panic shopping. So, but yeah, just the idea that there's emptiness. We we hate the mobile phone battery going down from 26 to 25 to 24 to 23. But that's the nature of all of life. It's happening to us all. Another thing that we are constantly feeling, and that plagues intensify, I think, is this tendency to dehumanize. So I think that's something that plagues do for us, because if you are a medical professional, or if you're in charge of perhaps the National Health Service or something like that, if you're in charge of having to allocate healthcare resources, you're used to having to deal with questions like, okay, we can afford to do this many hip operations, or we can afford to do, this many lung transplants or something, and maybe you could serve the elderly, and you could serve 10,000 elderly people for every 100 young people you could serve, and when you're allocating healthcare resources, you're always having to trade off things like that. It's just the nature of scarce resources. You're just going to have to make decisions like that. But at a time of plague, we read about Italian doctors having to choose between, okay, so you've got 3 patients, one's a 40-year-old with 2 kids, one's a 40-year-old in tip-top health, and one's a 65-year-old with underlying health concerns. Which of the 3 gets the respirator? And what's interesting is that is an intensification of an issue that lots of healthcare professionals are always having to deal with. But when it comes to the sharp end, you start having to trade off a person against a person. And then your belief in personal, individual human rights starts to feel very threatened. and you're in this business of trading off one person against another person. And so this tendency that we all have within us to dehumanize other people, that gets intensified too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised as well that we've not really seen anybody saying with any seriousness yet. I think we mentioned it when we talked about it last week a little bit, that ageism will come up out of this. That people say, oh, it's just the elderly who are in danger really, and those with underlying health conditions and things like that. So, oh my goodness. Keep yourself, Glenn.
I know. Pestilential preacher here. Pestilential preacher.
But it wouldn't surprise me if before long, because you could look at this and say, well, this is just the world way of, or let's use a people say this is just Mother Nature's way of dealing with the issues we've got. Like it's going to wipe out a whole load of the elderly population, which will put, who are putting a great amount of strain on our resources of healthcare already. And also, I think we've said that, I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but about the pollution in Italy seems to be dropping during this season. So could this be a good thing from a climate perspective? I'm really surprised we've not seen people coming out and saying these things already. And have you? You've seen it, actually, people saying it seriously. I mean, I've kind of thrown it about with people in the sense of it wouldn't surprise me if people start saying these things, but I don't think I've actually seen it being said yet.
Well, I mean, the whole search bar in Twitter, I clicked on it the other day, and the number one thing, and it was curated. It wasn't because so many people were tweeting about it, but it was curated by, someone at Silicon Valley. But it was the aerial picture of air pollution above northern Italy, and how much lower air pollution was above northern Italy, and it just and that is a trade. I don't know, that seems to me very dangerously moving towards trading off the human crisis against, well, on the other hand, there's a bit of a dip in pollution, and it's like, oh my goodness, again, we're trading off people against other factors, and that's just horribly dehumanizing. Maybe in 5 years' time, point me to a graph and say, oh, look, our carbon footprint actually dipped. What was that? Oh, that was COVID-19. Do you remember? Yeah, okay. In 5 years' time, maybe point that out. But right now, with 1,000 Italians dying.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah. So there's another thing that's intensified at a time of plague. And we've already mentioned, here's another thing that's intensified is tribalism. We've noted the danger of ageism. I think we saw that during Brexit, because there was quite a split between the elderly tended to vote more Brexit, and younger people tended to vote Remain. And people were saying just a few months ago, let's have another referendum in another year when all the elderly have died off, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll get a new. And now here is a virus that is particularly dangerous for the elderly. I do think ageism will be exacerbated. I think globalism versus nationalism, that old tussle between the everywheres and the somewheres, I think that's going to be exacerbated as we try to figure out, do we shut our borders? And when like the most kind of cosmopolitan, outsider friendly country like New Zealand like shuts its borders because of pandemic, you start to see, I think a lot of globalist versus nationalist kind of issues will come to the fore. I think left versus right politically, I think that will be exacerbated because some will see a bigger role for the government in this, and some will say, oh no, it's more about the family or whatever. So, and then you'll have the and those feed into the arguments about how do we tackle the pandemic? Do we try to flatten the curve, which means everybody locks down, everybody isolates, or do we do what the UK is doing at the moment, try to get this herd immunity going, which I somebody described it on Twitter as it's basically like having a chickenpox party, where which you do have, if your 2-year-old has chickenpox and you say to other mums and dads, why don't you come on over and let Jimmy catch chickenpox?
Everyone can get it. Yep.
Everyone can get it, and we'll have herd immunity. But one of the massive problems with having a massive chickenpox party is, what about when they go home to granddad? And so that's, again, why I think we're seeing the government saying, oh yeah, and by the way, we're going to have to isolate all the elderly for 4 months. But then, so you get these massive debates between the flatten the curve people and the herd immunity people. And, you know, guys like us who, let me stress, are not epidemiologists or virologists.
There seem to be a lot of epidemiologists doing the rounds on Facebook at the moment. They've all come out, all the epidemiologists have come out. They've all written very long Facebook posts to be shared.
Yes.
I see a lot of people going, oh, look, you know, we should listen to this. And I think, we don't know where this information's come from. You don't know who this person is. It's classic kind of fake news stuff. So
and it is the whole, like, between the flatten the curve and herd immunity people, like, and who do we believe? I thought Jurgen Klopp was brilliant.
Always is.
He always is. Just a man of great common sense. And if I'm clever, I'm going to be able to share Jurgen Klopp with you all. And he was asked his opinion on coronavirus, which kind of shows you everything that's wrong with celebrity culture. But if you think it's ridiculous that a football manager gets asked about coronavirus, so does he. And I just loved the answer that he gave. Let's have a look at what he said.
Look, what I don't like in life is that a very serious thing, a football manager's opinion is important. I don't understand that. I really don't understand it. It could ask you. You're exactly the same role than I am. So, and it's not important what famous people say. No, we have to speak about the things in the right manner, not people with no knowledge like me talking about something. People with knowledge should talk about it and should tell the people, do this, do that, do this, and everything will be fine or not. So, and not football managers. I don't understand that. Politics, coronavirus. Why me? I wear a base cap and have a bad shave. I'm concerned as much as you, maybe less. I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what your amount of is of being concerned, but my opinion is really not important. I live on this planet and I want the planet to be safe, healthy. I wish everybody the best, absolutely. But my opinion about Corona is not important. If somebody tells me we play football because I think smarter people said we can play football, I will not make the decision.
Actual common sense there.
I think not only is that a great clip, I think the best thing about that is that in your download history underneath, you just have a file called zombies.
Was that broadcast to the world? Yeah. And if people want to see my zombies, I think it's important that they see my zombies. And because isn't this fun on Zoom? Can you see it?
Live footage from Eastbourne right now.
Yeah. Can people see it?
Yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, I think it's there. Yeah, it is.
Is it there? But it doesn't seem to be popping up on the.
Yeah, you know, it is. It is.
It is. Okay. All right. Good. Huh?
Run, Glenn, run.
So for those listening in on podcast, you're really missing out. I have zombies as my green screen behind me. Anyway, let me take zombies off.
Those of a sensitive disposition.
There we go.
Books.
Isn't that?
There we go.
Yes. Now I've got.
That could be your office, couldn't it?
Let's just do a test, and whether what I say comes across as more learned now that I've
yeah, that's a good idea. Put some glasses on as well.
Virtual glasses. So in the midst of all these heightened kind of debates between lots of different people, again, what gets heightened is this sense of expertise and who to trust. The world is so complicated and it's complexifying by the minute, it seems. Therefore, the amount of issues in our lives that we have any competence to pronounce on is just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And we're just going to have to trust other people. And in the midst of all that, AJB on Twitter asked, how would you respond if you're a leader in the church, but you feel that the response to COVID-19 should be very different to the senior leader or to other leaders' plans? That's interesting.
As in the leader of the church.
So the leader of the church has a particular response and a particular plan based on coronavirus and what they're doing. If you have some kind of say within the church, but you disagree with what the overall leader says, what should be your response? I don't know. It seems to me like, again, if this is an intensification, which I think it is, if it's an intensification of life as normal, then I guess you do what you'd normally do. If you disagree with a leader, you go to the leader and you present what you feel prayerfully, and hopefully you get a hearing. But at the end of the day, if they go in a different direction, then I guess you do, I think, need to submit to what the leader says. It's difficult, but again, it's not a different issue to every other issue of leadership. It's just we feel like the stakes are a lot higher, and probably the stakes are higher. But yeah, I think one key thing is hopefully the leader will listen to you, and hopefully you feel listened to, and you feel listened to, and the leader is able to explain where they're coming from. And at some stage, I think loyalty begins at the point of disagreement, doesn't it? You can think you're being loyal to somebody because you just happen to be walking in the same direction that they're walking in. If they're walking in a very different direction, what do you do at that stage? Yeah, I guess without further understanding of what the particular positions of the various people are, I couldn't say much further than that. But good question by AJB. Other people have asked on Twitter. Mandy has asked, churches closing and going online versus those choosing not to. Is there a right decision? So what's your church doing at the moment, Paul?
At the moment, we're still meeting, although because we're Church of England, I think stuff has been passed down from above, from kind of head office and whatnot, saying, when we do communion, we're no longer doing the wine. We had switched from a single cup down to individual glasses, but now that seems to have been, kind of ruled out as well. Everyone's being encouraged just to wash hands. So children's groups, the children all went downstairs and washed their hands before they went to groups. I think they washed them before they came back. We're being encouraged not to shake hands with people and stuff like that. So, it's basically just we're continuing pretty much continuing as normal, but taking precautions, for safety's sake. But we have also started live streaming the services as well. So I think yesterday was the first time we'd streamed the services. So there were some people I know who were away for whatever reason. I was in church, I was preaching 3 times yesterday morning. I wouldn't say I looked around and thought, well, my goodness, there's barely anyone here. It wasn't a noticeable decline. So
No.
I think everyone's saying really until there's a stipulation, from maybe the government saying gatherings over a certain size should stop, they'll keep going, and obviously for a number of churches, even if they said, gatherings over 100, no more, there'll be a good number of churches that could continue still anyway, even under that. So
yeah. If people haven't seen a document by Andy Crouch, Love in the Time of Coronavirus is excellent. Let me bring it up for people. And is that up on the screen, Paul?
Yep.
Yeah. So Andy Crouch says, at this extraordinary moment, local leaders, people who lead groups of 10 to 1,000 people, have perhaps the greatest opportunity to shape culture in the United States that they have ever had. This is a guide for those of us who are Christian leaders at this moment. And here are the two things he really wants to ram home. With the arrival of COVID-19 in the United States, we need to change the horizon of possibility extremely rapidly in two fundamental ways. One, we need to change norms of social interaction literally overnight to minimize the transmission of the virus. He says, when dealing with pandemics, the measures that will actually make a difference always need to be taken sooner than we think. And then his second point is we need to redirect social energy from anxiety and panic to love and preparation. This crisis presents an extraordinary opportunity to fortify small communities of love and care for our neighbors. That will only happen if we lead in a way that reduces fear, increases faith, and reorients all of us from self-protection to serving others. So I guess two big things. He says, let's radically change the way that we meet, and let's radically communicate a message of faith rather than fear. And I think in the States, it seemed to me, as I was sort of online on Sunday, a lot of churches were not meeting and were just doing live streaming and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's going to come this way to the UK. I don't know. I think Andy Crouch in his article says, look, cancel everything else. Cancel meetings, cancel conferences, cancel anything else. But worship should be the one thing you prioritize. But there are definitely circumstances in which the loving thing to do is not to meet and to go online. So there's that, and I think there's an opportunity for organizations like ourselves and for churches as well who are more web savvy to get online and to speak good news into these areas. I think there's an opportunity right now, especially if we happen to go into lockdown. I think there'll be a lot of people who might not be so good at working at home as Paul Feasey is, and might go onto YouTube. And wouldn't it be nice if they, encountered messages of hope and love here? So I think for a season there will be different ways of meeting. I think social distancing will mean we do distance socialing. You heard that pun here first, by the way. Social distancing means distance socialing, which is what we're doing right now. You're welcome. So there are opportunities for that. But I think that second thing that Andy Crouch was speaking about, the messages of hope in the midst of a world that could lose its head, I think that'll be really important. What should we be saying? What are our messages? What's our distinctive message at this time, Paul? Oh, Paul's buffering. Oh, he's just very still. Hello, Paul. Are you there?
Stream doesn't look like it's.
There we
go.
There
we go. Looks like we've come round. The thing is, the people's response at the moment is entirely sort of understandable if you really don't think there is anything more than, this world, this life, and this is the one chance you get. And once it's gone, it's gone. Whereas, we have a different perspective, don't we? We should have an eternal perspective. And we should have a perspective not only of kind of, well, if we die, we die, and to live is Christ, to die is gain, but that even kind of in life now, there's much to trust that God is in control of those things. So whereas for some people would look at this and say everything's out of my control, everyone's out of control, the world is out of control. For us, that shouldn't be our view. So there's an opportunity, even as we live through it, as we hopefully will, to be a witness in that way, I suppose. But how that necessarily comes out, I mean, I don't know. It might be different in different circumstances, I suppose, for different people.
Yeah. It's really struck me how without Jesus, your life really is boom and bust. Like it really is highs and lows. If you invest entirely in life under the sun, then when you get the promotion, it is heaven, and when you get sacked, it is hell.
Yeah.
And when you're just toddling along in life, everything's hunky dory. And when there's a 0.5% chance of dying from an illness, it's the end of the world, and this is not to minimize the pandemic. I think it's like I say, it's an intensification of our mortal condition. But I think without a faith framework, then there's going to be a much less robust, even response to tragedy. So, I said last week that I think what we contribute to the world and what we have that's different from the world is faith and hope and love. And I think a world that doesn't know what it believes is going to have boom and bust, peak and trough, ups and downs that are going to be incredibly disorienting. So hopefully Christians can model faith in the midst of this. And I think hopefully Christians can model hope in the midst of this, as opposed to despair. And the hope is not a glib thing. I love that there's a Matt comic. I'll try and find the Matt comic before the end of the broadcast. But so he's a cartoonist for the Telegraph, and he's got this brilliant image of like a street preacher with a massive placard, and the placard just says, "Everything's going to be okay." And there's a couple walking past him, and one turns to the other and says, "Nutter." And it's just this idea that when everyone's freaking out and losing their head, hope is the most countercultural posture to have in the world. Again, this is not to glibly say, "Oh, it's all going to be okay, que sera, sera." It's facing fully the fact that is my will up to date? Have I, is my funeral plans, are they written out so that people I'm thinking about these things. Okay. So it's not as though I'm blasé about imminent death or anything like that. But in the hope, in the face of that, and in the midst of that, can we still hope? And I think Christians who are both realists and optimists need to model some of that, where you face as bad as it could be, and you say, "There's something worth living for. Let's keep moving forwards, because the future eventually is bright."
Sure. Yeah.
And then love, faith, hope, and love. As opposed to hoarding, as opposed to self-serving, what is the loving thing to do? And maybe the loving thing to do is to stick a note in everyone's door in your street and start a WhatsApp group and say, how can we serve one another? And this is an opportunity for community and to move towards people. Is it just basics like don't hoard food, and going above and beyond in terms of how are the elderly doing, and especially if they have to self-isolate for 4 months, how do we serve that community? These could be distinctive ways that we show something different. Pete Thorne on Top Chat has said, should I give my April sermon online? If so, should I use zombies?
Definitely use zombies.
I think you should deliver it face to face with zombies. That's my advice. Ben Kirkwood has just been on Top Chat to say, sad that we most likely won't get to see you in Northern Ireland for our Easter week. God bless. Yeah, lots of things being cancelled right now. So Friday and Saturday, I was really looking forward to a Christian Heritage London conference where we'd talk about Jesus in all the Bible. And I was going to get to speak with Andrew Wilson and Peter Lightheart. And unfortunately, we've had to cancel that. Sorry if you've bought tickets for that. We will hold them over for the postponed conference. We're definitely wanting to do that, but that's going to have to be put off. I've had a mission week in the Wirral Gospel Partnership. I was doing a week at the end of this month. That's had to be put off. And then at the start of April, a mission week in Northern Ireland, that's had to be put off as well. So this is the nature of things right now. But as face-to-face proclamation is more difficult, online, I think, will be more important. And so for that reason, guys, if you're on YouTube right now and you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, hit the subscribe button right now and click the bell as well, because subscribe doesn't mean as much as the bell anymore in terms of being notified about our new videos. And do give our stuff a like and a share. We're going to have lots more videos coming up this week, including tomorrow. We're going to be interviewing a guy called Jackie Chan, who is a church leader in Hong Kong. And not only have they gone through their own pandemic crisis, they have great links to the mainland, to China. And he's got some great stories to tell about how this countercultural life of faith and hope and love is making a difference in China in the midst of those plagues. So stay tuned tomorrow at 2 p.m. and we'll have another chat about this very worked example of how the church is speaking of Jesus in the midst of the plagues. Great. Just one more question, actually, from Twitter. Paul, what would you say about this? Sebastian, otherwise known as Sonic Knight. That's such a cool handle, Sonic Knight. Sebastian asks, can you discuss about the future of the church, considering rising secularism? Will this pandemic change things and show that people need something bigger than themselves? What do you reckon?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think, I mean, it's not impossible, is it, for people to kind of see this as a wake-up call? My cynical nature makes me think that this is the kind of thing that'll happen, and eventually we'll move past it, and people will almost just forget it happened.
Yeah.
You know, we have very short memories.
Yeah.
And, you know, whereas at the moment, people might be sitting there kind of, you know, questioning their very existence and, you know, what am I in this, you know, in this universe that I might be snuffed out or whatever. I don't know whether that will last through this. I mean, I'm sure, I don't doubt that there will be some people at least who, in the light of this, it does make them sit up a bit. Whether it will be a kind of something that makes a huge dent at all, I don't know. But it's not impossible.
Yeah.
And I suppose in the past there have been occasions where, I think we talked about last week about the Roman Empire with the effect that some of the plague had there. But again, it was a very different it was a different time and a very different type of disease. You know, probably far more fatal as well. And
yeah, they lost a third of the population. Yeah.
So will this have such an impact in people's minds longer term? I don't know, but who's to say?
It's fearful though, isn't it, to think coronavirus might not be enough to wake us up. And you're just like, do we need a plague that takes out a third of us? Like, what do we need?
To
make us fall out of love with our flesh and the world and the devil, you know? Like what could possibly wake us up? I think in terms of the seriousness of coronavirus, like even if coronavirus is not as fatal as we fear, I think it does show at least that if not this virus, then some other virus like it could well wipe us out, or at least, wipe out a fair chunk of us. And I think, it ought to make us consider the sinking sand that we've built on. But you just wonder, like, how many storms does God have to send? And it's just like in the book of Amos, isn't it? In Amos chapter 4, the Lord says, I keep sending plagues to you, and you still don't turn to me. Which is interesting in with a modern 21st century mentality. We feel like, oh, if God sends plagues, then we would turn away from him.
Yeah.
But obviously the correct response to the storm is to flee the sinking sand and to turn to the rock. And the Lord keeps sending plagues in the hope that we would turn to him. It's the same in Revelation. Again, the whole world is sent, as the seven angels pour out the seven bowls, that they are plagues. And they're meant to make us repent and to turn to the Lord. But I guess the good news is that for those taking refuge in Jesus, there are opportunities right now to know his nearness, to know his closeness, opportunities to really take eternal hope to heart, and not to take it for granted. And I think opportunities to reach out to others who as Spurgeon said during the time of cholera outbreaks in London, he said there was little scoffing then, which I think is interesting. I wonder whether the sorts of evangelistic and apologetic questions that get asked will be different. They'll be, how could God allow this to happen, sort of thing. But at least with those sorts of questions, you're dealing with pastoral matters and matters that get you to the gospel a lot quicker. I wonder if there'll be a lot less scoffing anyway, as people realize how weak we really are. Just some thoughts anyway. But guys, thank you so much for all your questions on Top Chat. You can leave questions on the video proper as this ends up being posted. Spartan Theology says, first day working from home, not sure how well this will go. All the best. All the best, Spartan Theology. Let us know how you get on, because we'll be doing the same thing again tomorrow at 2 p.m. when we've got Jackie Lamb as our special guest. And also later on in the week, we're going to be talking to Nate Morganlock and Barry Cooper, the people who brought you Life Explored and Discipleship Explored, and James Carey, who's brought you things like The God Particle and A Monk's Tale and all that kind of good stuff. Comedy writer for the BBC, James Carey. But that'll do us for now. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Always a pleasure. Never a chore.
Never a chore. Except it is. It's work for you. This is work. But you make it look easy. Good.
I need to get back to Netflix. So
sorry to disturb you. And we'll disturb you all again tomorrow at 2 p.m. So stay tuned for us talking to Jackie Lamb. But until then, God bless. See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.